The police lights hit my house before I even got out of the car. Step out of the vehicle. Not one officer. Two. And she was already pointing at me. That's him. Too loud. Too certain. In my own driveway. What she didn't know? I had closed on this house less than 3 hours ago, and standing right behind her was a man who worked for me. Blue and red washed over the garage door, like I'd done something wrong just by pulling in. I hadn't even turned off the engine yet. The siren chirped once, sharp, unnecessary, like a warning. That's when I saw her. Brenda Whitmore was already standing on my lawn, one hand on her hip, the other pointing straight at me, like she'd been waiting all day for this exact moment. I opened the car door slowly. The hinge creaked. Gravel crunched under my shoes. As I stepped out, 2 officers stood by their cruisers, watching me, like they were still deciding what kind of situation this was. Something about the timing felt off, like I'd walked into the middle of a story already in progress. Brenda took a few steps closer, heels clicking against my driveway. Perfect posture, perfect hair, that tight smile people wear when they think they're winning. He's been trespassing, she said, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. I told you, he doesn't belong here. I looked down at the keys in my hand. Still had the realtor's tag on them. New, clean, proof. I'd closed on this place less than 3 hours ago. That detail didn't seem to matter to her. Behind the patrol cars, I caught movement. Curtains shifting, phones raised. The whole street was watching now. Of course they were. Brenda leaned in, just a little closer, lowering her voice, like she was sharing something important. We have standards in this neighborhood. You people, without saying it out loud. I didn't respond. Not yet. Silence does something words can't. It makes people talk. One of the officers walked up. Calm. Measured. Sir, can you tell me what's going on? I glanced at him, then back at her. She didn't break eye contact. Not even for a second. That was interesting. Most people look away when they lie. She didn't. Or maybe she didn't think she was lying. He forced his way onto private property, she added too fast. Refused to identify himself. I felt threatened. That word hung in the air. Heavy. Intentional. The officer's eyes flicked to my keys again, then to the front door, then back to me. Something wasn't adding up. Good. I let the silence stretch just a little longer. Brenda shifted her weight. Impatient. She needed me to react. Needed me to argue. Needed me to play the part she'd already written. I didn't. Instead, I took a slow breath. Fresh-cut grass. Her perfume. Too strong. Then I noticed him, standing just behind her shoulder. Quiet. Still. Watching. Mid-40s. Clean cut. Polo shirt. And on the left side, a small logo. Subtle. Most people wouldn't notice it. I did. Because I'd seen it before. On reports. On contracts. On documents. That across my desk every single week. My grip tightened, just slightly. And in that moment, everything shifted. She just didn't know it yet. I realized something she clearly didn't. She had just made this personal in a way she couldn't take back. I held the keys up just enough for the officer to see them clearly. The plastic tag still swung slightly from the ignition fob like it had something to prove. For a brief second, the entire scene seemed to hesitate. Like even the air was waiting to see who was actually in control here. But Brenda stepped in before that pause could settle into anything useful. Her voice was sharper now. Faster. Like she needed to fill every gap before reality caught up. Those could be stolen, she said. And that was the moment I realized she was not just wrong. She was committed to being wrong in public. That is a very different kind of problem. The kind that usually ends badly for someone. Just not always the person you expect. The officer looked at me again, more carefully this time. His eyes traced from the keys to my car, then to the house behind me. I could almost see the checklist running in his head. Nothing about this looked forced. Nothing looked broken. Nothing looked like a break-in, which made her story thinner by the second. But she did not slow down. She doubled down. He has been circling the block all week, she added. I almost smiled at that. I had only been in this zip code for 4 hours, which meant either she was guessing or she had already decided who I was before I even arrived. Both options told me more than she intended. The second officer shifted his stance slightly, glancing toward the first like they were silently comparing notes. I could tell they were starting to separate noise from facts, which meant this situation was about to tilt, but not in the way Brenda expected. I finally spoke. Calm. Steady. No rush. I closed on this property this afternoon, I said. And I let the words sit there without pushing them, without trying to convince anyone, just placing them in the open like evidence that did not need explanation. Brenda let out a short laugh. Too quick. Too forced. That is not possible, she snapped. And there it was again. That certainty that did not come from knowledge, only from control. And control only works until it meets something stronger. The officer held out his hand slightly, a quiet signal. Not aggressive, just enough to slow the room down. Do you have documentation? He asked. I nodded once, reaching into my jacket pocket. The paper felt crisp between my fingers, still fresh from the closing office. Ink barely dry. I unfolded it carefully, not because I needed to, but because the pace mattered. Every second stretched the tension just a little further. I handed it over, and while he scanned the top lines, I glanced past him again. Back to the man behind Brenda. He had not moved. Not a step. But something in his posture had changed. Shoulders tighter. Jaw set. Like he had recognized something before she did. That small logo on his chest caught the light again. Subtle. Professional. Easy to ignore unless you knew exactly where it came from. And I did. Because I had signed off on budgets tied to that exact division just last quarter. The officer exhaled quietly, nodding as he read, then handed the document to his partner. Everything here checks out so far, he said. Not loudly. Just enough. But it was enough. Brenda's expression flickered for a split second. Just a crack. But she recovered fast, stepping forward again. There must be some mistake, she insisted. And now it sounded less like confidence and more like refusal. Like she was trying to push reality backward with volume alone. I slid my hands into my pockets. Relaxed. Letting the moment breathe. Because now it was no longer about proving anything. It was about watching how far she would go. And more importantly, who would go down with her. The man behind her finally shifted. Just slightly. And that small movement told me everything I needed to know. He understood exactly where this was heading, even if she did not. And that meant tomorrow was already starting to take shape. The second officer handed the document back to me, slower this time, like he already knew how this was going to end. The energy around us shifted just enough that even the neighbors could feel it. Phones lowered slightly. Whispers started to replace that earlier silence. But Brenda did not notice, or refused to notice, which made it worse. This is not over, she said, stepping forward again. Voice tighter now, less polished. That was the first crack I had been waiting for. Because people like her rely on control staying smooth, predictable, unquestioned. And the moment it starts slipping, they push harder instead of pulling back. Which is exactly what she did. You cannot just move in without HOA approval, she continued, turning slightly so the officers could hear her better. Like she was presenting a case instead of escalating a situation she had already lost. The first officer raised a hand again. Calmer this time. Firmer. Ma'am, this is a civil matter at most, he said. And that word landed heavier than anything else he had said so far. Civil, meaning not criminal. Meaning not urgent. Meaning not what she had called them out here for. For a brief second, her mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a pause. A flicker. Then she pivoted. Fast. He refused to comply when I asked him questions, she added. Reaching for something. Anything that still sounded like authority. But it sounded thinner now. Stretched too far. I stayed exactly where I was. Hands still in my pockets. Posture relaxed. Because reacting now would only give her something to grab onto. And I could tell she needed that. Needed me to push back so she could push harder. But I did not give it to her. Instead, I glanced again at the man behind her. Daniel. Though she had not said his name, I already knew it. And now I could see it more clearly. The tension in his jaw. The way his eyes moved from me to the officers and back. Calculating. Not confused. Not surprised. Just aware. Which told me everything I needed. He recognized me. Or at least recognized something close enough to be dangerous. Brenda did not notice him. Not really. She was too focused on winning the moment. Not understanding the situation. This neighborhood has rules, she said again. But now it sounded like repetition instead of authority. Like she was reminding herself more than anyone else. The second officer shifted his weight and looked directly at me. Sir, you are free to go about your evening, he said. Simple. Clear. Final. And just like that, the entire foundation she had built this scene on collapsed without noise. No drama. No argument. Just a quiet statement that erased everything she had tried to create. I nodded once. No need to say more. Then turned slightly toward my front door. The key slid into the lock with a clean click that sounded louder than it should have. Maybe because everyone was still watching. Maybe because it mattered more than it looked. Behind me, I heard Brenda take a sharp breath, like she was about to say something else, something bigger. But she stopped, just for a second. And in that second, I knew she was realizing something was off. Not fully, not yet, but enough to feel it. I pushed the door open slowly, stepping inside without rushing, letting the moment stretch just a little longer. Because now it was no longer about this driveway, or this street, or even her. It was about what happened next. And more importantly, where. Because the place where this actually mattered was not outside. It was somewhere she could not see. And as the door closed behind me, cutting off the lights, the voices, and her control, one thought settled in clearly. She had no idea who she had just picked a fight with. The house felt different the second the door closed behind me. Quieter, heavier, like the noise outside had not followed me in, but the tension had. I stood there for a moment with my hand still on the handle, listening to the muffled voices fading through the walls. Brenda's tone was still sharp even when I could not make out the words. She was not done, not even close. I set my keys on the kitchen counter. The plastic tag tapped, once against the surface. Small sound, but it echoed more than it should have. Maybe because everything else had gone still. I walked slowly through the living room. Boxes still stacked near the walls. The place smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. New beginnings. Clean lines. No history yet. And somehow she had already tried to claim it. That part stuck with me. Not the shouting. Not the police. But how quickly she moved to control something that was not hers. I paused near the front window, just enough to see outside without being obvious. The cruisers were still there. Lights no longer flashing. Just idling. Neighbors lingering like they were waiting for an encore. Brenda stood near the sidewalk now, talking fast, hands moving, trying to reshape what had just happened into something she could still win. But the officers were already stepping back, disengaging. Their body language had shifted. The situation was over for them, even if it was not over for her. Then I saw him again. Daniel, standing a few feet behind her, not speaking, not interrupting, just watching. And this time he looked directly at the house. Not at the officers, not at her, at the house. Like he was trying to see through the walls, trying to confirm something he already suspected. And when his eyes aligned with where I stood, even though he could not actually see me, I knew. He knew exactly who I was. Or at least close enough that it made him uncomfortable. That small logo on his chest was not just familiar anymore. It was specific. I could picture the department, the reporting structure, the internal emails, the kind of compliance policies most employees skim and forget, except when they matter. And in that moment, they were about to matter a lot. I stepped back from the window, letting the curtain fall into place, cutting off the view. Because I did not need to watch the rest. I already knew how this part ended. What mattered was the next part. I walked into the kitchen again, pulling my phone from my pocket. The screen lit up instantly. Clean, organized, efficient, just like everything else in my world outside this neighborhood. I opened my email first, scrolling past routine updates, project summaries, approvals waiting for signatures. All the quiet machinery that kept things moving without noise. Then I switched to the internal directory, typing slowly, deliberately. Not because I needed to, because the act itself mattered. Whitmore. Daniel. The name appeared exactly where I expected it to. No surprises. No errors. Title. Department. Reporting line. Everything laid out in clean, structured detail. I tapped into his profile, scanning quickly. Performance reviews. Recent evaluations. Compliance acknowledgments. All the small things people ignore until they become the only things that matter. I leaned back slightly against the counter, letting out a slow breath. Because now the situation had shifted completely. Not outside, not on the street, but here, where decisions were not loud, not emotional, just documented, processed, executed. I set the phone down for a second, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the counter, feeling the cool surface ground me. Because this was no longer about proving anything. It was about timing, precision, making sure every step that followed was clean, undeniable, entirely within the lines. Outside, a car door shut. Voices faded. The street returned to normal like nothing had happened. But inside, something had already started moving. Quiet, controlled, irreversible. And as I picked my phone back up, one thought settled in with complete clarity. Tomorrow was going to be very different for him. I did not rush anything that night, because rushing is how people make mistakes they cannot undo. And this was not the kind of situation you fix with speed. It was the kind you control with precision. I moved through the house slowly, opening cabinets, checking rooms, letting the normal rhythm of settling in mask what was actually forming in the background. Every small action grounded me while something much larger aligned quietly behind it. The refrigerator hummed low, steady, the only real sound inside. And for a moment it felt like any other move-in day. Except it was not. Not anymore. I pulled a glass from one of the boxes, filled it with water, and stood at the counter, thinking. Not about her. Not even about what she had said. About him. Because he was the only part of this that mattered now. Brenda was noise. Daniel was consequence. That distinction was important. I picked my phone up again, opening his employee file one more time. Slower now. Reading details instead of scanning. 5 years with the company. Mid-level operations. Solid performance reviews. Nothing remarkable. Nothing risky. Exactly the kind of employee who blends into the system and assumes the system will always protect him. Those are the ones who get caught off guard the hardest. I scrolled further. Compliance certifications. Code of conduct acknowledgments. Signed. Dated. Clear. Every employee signs them. Most never think about them again. But they are not suggestions. They are conditions. And conditions matter when lines get crossed. I tapped into the policy section. Not because I needed to. Because I wanted to confirm the exact language. The phrasing that turns behavior into liability. Conflict of interest. Conduct outside the workplace that impacts company reputation. Misuse of authority. All written in calm, neutral sentences that carry more weight than any argument ever could. I set the phone down again, letting that sit. Because this was no longer about reacting to what happened outside. It was about documenting what would happen next. Timing mattered here. Not tonight. Not in the heat of the moment. In the morning, when everything is clear, structured, undeniable. I walked back toward the front of the house, pausing near the window again. Just a quick glance. The street had settled. The police were gone. Most of the neighbors had disappeared back inside. But one figure still stood near the sidewalk. Brenda, pacing now, phone pressed to her ear, talking fast, her free hand cutting through the air like she was still trying to control something that had already slipped. And a few feet behind her, Daniel. No phone, no movement, just standing there, looking smaller somehow, like the situation had finally caught up to him in a way she could not yet feel. He was not watching her anymore. He was staring at the ground. And that told me everything. I stepped back again, letting the curtain fall. Because I did not need to see more. I already knew what that posture meant. Awareness. Not panic yet, but close. And once awareness sets in, the rest follows quickly. I checked the time on my phone. Late, but not too late. I opened my calendar, scrolling to the next morning. The schedule was already full. Meetings, reviews, approvals, the usual structure. I adjusted one block. Small change, barely noticeable to anyone else. But it created exactly the space I needed. Then I drafted a short internal note. Nothing dramatic. Just a request for a routine review. Phrased the way it always is. Neutral. Professional. Impossible to argue with. I did not send it yet. Not until everything was exactly where it needed to be. I locked the phone and set it down carefully. The screen went dark. The room returned to that quiet hum again. But now it felt different. More settled. More certain. Because the outcome was no longer a question. Only the process remained. And as I turned off the kitchen light and headed toward the hallway, one detail stayed sharp in my mind. He had already recognized me, which meant he knew what was coming, even if she still did not. I woke up before the alarm, not because I was stressed, because everything was already aligned. And when things are aligned, your mind does not wander. It moves forward. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the quiet settle in. The house was still unfamiliar in the small ways. Different light angles, different sounds, but already mine in the ways that mattered. Outside, the neighborhood was calm again. No flashing lights, no voices, just the low hum of early morning routines starting up. Sprinklers ticking somewhere down the street. A car door closing in the distance. Normal, predictable, controlled. I got up without rushing, moved through the kitchen, poured coffee. The smell cut clean through the air. Sharp, steady, grounding. I checked my phone. No surprises. Emails already coming in. Overnight updates. Approvals waiting. The usual flow. Nothing urgent. Nothing out of place, which was exactly how it should be. I opened the draft from last night, reading it once more. Every word neutral, every sentence structured, no emotion, no accusation, just a request that followed policy exactly as written. That is how real authority works. It does not argue. It documents. I adjusted one line. Small change, but precise. Then I sent it. Just like that. No hesitation. The message moved into the system quietly. No sound. No alert. But it was already in motion. I took a sip of coffee, watching the screen for a second. Not expecting an immediate response, but knowing it would come. It always does when the request is placed correctly. I set the phone down and walked toward the front window again. Just a quick glance. The street looked ordinary. Almost too ordinary after yesterday. A few cars passing. A jogger moving down the sidewalk. And then I saw them. Across the street. Brenda standing near her mailbox, already dressed like she had somewhere important to be. Posture straight. Expression tight. And next to her, Daniel, holding his phone, staring at the screen like it had just changed something he could not ignore. That was fast. Faster than I expected. Which meant the system had already reached him. Not fully. Not officially. But enough to signal that something had started. Brenda was talking. I could tell by the movement of her hands. But he was not responding. Not really. His attention was fixed on whatever was in front of him. That shift mattered. Because it meant he was no longer following her lead. He was reacting to something else entirely. Something she could not see. I stepped back from the window, letting the curtain fall again. Because the outside did not matter anymore. Everything important was already happening elsewhere. I picked up my phone as it buzzed lightly against the counter. A response. Brief. Direct. Confirming receipt. Scheduling a review. Standard language. But behind it, a clear direction. I opened my calendar. The block I created was now filled. Placed exactly where it needed to be. No overlap. No conflict. Just a clean line through the morning. I finished my coffee slowly. No rush. Because this was not about speed. It was about sequence. And the sequence was already locked in. I grabbed my keys from the counter. The same plastic tag still attached. Still new. Still clean. A small detail. But it reminded me how quickly things can shift when someone assumes control they do not have. I stepped toward the door, pausing for just a second before opening it. The handle was cool under my hand. The morning air was waiting on the other side. And as I pulled it open, one thought stayed clear and steady. He had already seen the first signal. But the real conversation had not started yet. I stepped outside into the morning air like nothing had changed. Like yesterday had not unfolded right here on this exact driveway. But I could feel it under the surface. That quiet shift most people miss. The kind that does not show up in noise. Only in behavior. The street looked calm. Almost staged. Sunlight clean across the lawns. Sprinklers ticking in slow arcs. But across the street, nothing was normal. Brenda was still talking. Faster. Now. Sharper. Her voice carrying just enough to cut through the quiet. But Daniel was not listening. Not really. His phone was still in his hand. Screen lit. Eyes locked on it like it held something heavier than anything she was saying. I walked toward my car at a steady pace. Not slow. Not rushed. Just enough to stay in control of the moment. Gravel shifted under my shoes again. Same sound as yesterday. But now it meant something different. I could feel his attention before I even looked up. That subtle awareness people have when they know exactly who is approaching. I opened my car door. Paused just long enough. Then glanced across the street. And this time, our eyes met directly. No distance. No confusion. Just recognition. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But enough. The kind of change only someone paying attention would catch. His shoulders tightened slightly. His grip on the phone adjusted. Small details. But they told the whole story. He knew. Not everything. But enough to understand that whatever was on his screen was connected to me. Brenda kept talking. Stepping closer to him now. Trying to pull him back into her version of control. They cannot just ignore HOA authority like that, she said, voice rising again. But he did not respond. Not to her. Not to me. Just standing there between two realities. One loud and familiar. One quiet and unavoidable. I closed my car door slowly, letting the sound settle. Then leaned slightly against it for a second. Not saying anything. Not breaking the moment. Because silence does something words cannot. It forces people to fill the space themselves. And he did. His eyes flicked back to the phone, then to me again. Calculating. Measuring. Trying to decide how much I knew. how far this had already gone. That hesitation mattered. Because hesitation means uncertainty. And uncertainty is where control shifts. Brenda finally noticed. Not fully, but enough to feel that something was off. Her voice dropped just slightly. Less confident now. "Daniel," she said, turning toward him, searching for confirmation she was no longer getting. He still did not answer right away. And that delay stretched longer than anything else that had happened so far. Longer than the sirens. Longer than the shouting. Because this was the moment where everything started separating. Her version of events. In reality, I pushed myself off the car gently, straightening up, keys in hand. And for the first time, I spoke. Not loud. Not confrontational. Just clear enough to carry across the distance. "Morning," I said. Simple. Neutral. Like yesterday had been nothing. Like this was just another day. But it was not. And he knew it. Brenda turned sharply toward me, ready to respond, ready to push again. But something in his posture stopped her. Just enough. He stepped forward slightly. Not toward me. Not toward her. Just enough to shift his position in the space. And that was all it took. The balance changed. Subtle, but real. I opened my car door again. This time without pausing. Sliding into the driver's seat. The interior was still new. Still unfamiliar. But already mine. I started the engine. The low hum filled the space. And as I pulled out of the driveway, I caught one last glimpse in the side mirror. Brenda still standing there, mid-sentence. Daniel silent beside her. And the distance between them already starting to show. Because whatever message he had received was no longer something she could control. And as I turned onto the street, one thing was certain. He was going to have to answer for it soon. I parked in my usual spot without thinking about it. The motion automatic. Smooth. Like every other morning. But today the air inside the building felt different the second I walked in. Not because anything had changed physically. Because I already knew something had shifted beneath the surface. The lobby was quiet. Polished floors reflecting clean lines of light. The receptionist gave a quick nod. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. But my phone buzzed once in my hand before I even reached the elevator. Short. Controlled vibration. I did not need to check it to know what it was. Timing like that is never random. I stepped into the elevator. Doors sliding closed with a soft hiss. Sealing off the outside world. Just me and the reflection staring back from the metal panel. Calm. Steady. Unchanged. I glanced down at the screen. One message. Internal. Marked priority, but not urgent. Exactly how it should be. I opened it. Brief summary. Review initiated. Meeting confirmed. All the right departments looped in. Compliance. Human resources. Direct reporting line. Everything structured. Nothing emotional. Just process. That is how things move when they are real. The elevator chimed softly as it reached my floor. Doors opening into a hallway that looked exactly the same as yesterday. But it was not. Not anymore. I stepped out. Shoes quiet against the carpet. Passing familiar offices. Familiar faces. Nods exchanged. Routine intact. But behind that routine, the system was already working. I could feel it in the timing. In the small glances people did not realize they were making. Word had not spread. Not yet. But the movement had started. I reached the conference room and pushed the door open. The space inside cool. Controlled. Screens already lit. Documents queued. Chairs aligned perfectly. Everything waiting. I set my phone down on the table. Not rushing. Just placing it exactly where it needed to be. A few minutes later, they started arriving. One by one. Quiet. Professional. No unnecessary conversation. Just presence. That is another sign. When people understand the weight of a situation, they do not fill the room with noise. They wait. Daniel was the last to walk in. And the moment he stepped through the door, the difference between yesterday and today became clear. He looked composed, but not comfortable. Posture straight. Movements measured. Like someone trying to hold control over something already slipping. His eyes moved quickly across the room, taking in who was there. Then they landed on me. And for a fraction of a second, everything stopped. Recognition fully set in now. No doubt left. No confusion. Just understanding. He knew exactly what this was. And more importantly, why? He took his seat slowly. Hands folding together on the table. Small detail. But telling. People do that when they are bracing. Not preparing. I let the silence sit for a moment. Not long. Just enough to settle the room into focus. Then I began, voice calm. Even, no edge, no pressure. Just clarity. This is a routine review, I said. And that was technically true, which made it more effective than anything else I could have said. His eyes did not leave mine, but I could see the shift behind them. Calculation turning into acceptance. Piece by piece, I outlined the process, the policies, the expectations. Every word aligned with documentation already in front of him. Nothing new, nothing unexpected, except the context. Because context is what changes everything. He nodded once, slowly, acknowledging each point without interruption. And that silence spoke louder than any defense could have. Because there was no defense here, only alignment between action and consequence. I slid one document forward across the table, stopping it just within his reach. Clean, simple, final. And as his hand moved toward it, I could see the exact moment it settled in completely. Not just what was happening, but why it had to happen this way. And as the pen rested between his fingers, one thing was already certain. This meeting was not going to last long. The pen touched the paper and stopped for just a second. Not because he did not understand what it meant, because this was the last moment he still had a choice in how he handled it. The room stayed quiet. No one rushing him. No one adding pressure. Because pressure was not needed here. Everything that mattered was already in front of him. Clean. Documented. Undeniable. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost quietly, then signed. One smooth motion. No hesitation after that first pause. Just acceptance. He placed the pen down carefully, not sliding it, not dropping it, just setting it in place like he was trying to keep something controlled even as everything shifted. I nodded once, not as approval, just acknowledgement. The process moved forward immediately, not emotionally, not dramatically, just efficiently. Documents collected. Next steps outlined. Access adjustments already scheduled. The system does not wait once it starts. That is the difference. Outside, people argue. Inside, things execute. Daniel stood up when it was done. Posture still straight, but different now. Not defensive, not uncertain, just quieter. Like the noise had been removed from his situation entirely. He did not look at anyone else, just at me. And there was something in that look. Not anger, not blame, just understanding. Because he knew exactly where the line had been crossed, even if he had not been the one to step over it directly. That is how association works when it becomes visible. He gave a small nod, then turned and walked out, the door closing softly behind him. No slam, no reaction, just final. The room stayed still for a moment after he left, not out of tension, out of completion. Then everything resumed. Chairs moving, screens updating, conversations returning to normal topics. Because for everyone else, this was just another process, another review, another decision completed. But for him, it was not just a meeting. It was a shift that would follow him long after today. I gathered my things without rushing, sliding my phone back into my pocket, checking the time. Everything still on schedule. No delays, no disruption, just alignment. I stepped out into the hallway. The same hallway as before. Same lighting. Same quiet movement. But now the system had finished what it started. And that kind of finish is invisible to most people. Because it does not announce itself. It just leaves results behind. The elevator ride down felt shorter. Or maybe it just felt clearer. No anticipation left. Just resolution. When the doors opened to the lobby, the world outside was exactly the same as when I walked in. Traffic moving. Sunlight steady. People passing by without noticing anything had changed. But I knew better. I stepped outside. The air warmer now. Late morning settling in. And as I pulled into my driveway again later that afternoon, everything looked exactly like it had yesterday. Same houses. Same lawns. Same quiet street. Except this time, no one was watching. No phones raised. No voices calling out. Just stillness. I stepped out of the car, closing the door with a soft click. And as I walked toward the front of the house, I saw her, Brenda, standing near the edge of her lawn. Not pacing, not shouting, just standing there. Her posture different now. Tighter, smaller, like something had been taken away that she could not replace. She looked at me as I approached. And for the first time, she did not speak. Not immediately, not confidently, just watching, waiting, trying to understand something that had already moved past her. I stopped for a brief second. Just enough to meet her eyes. No tension, no confrontation, just calm. And then I said it. Simple, direct, exactly as it needed to be. You should not have called the police. I paused, just long enough for the words to settle, then added, on your husband's employer. And that was it. No explanation, No follow-up. Just truth placed exactly where it belonged. I turned and walked inside, the door closing behind me without sound. And as the lock clicked into place, one thing was certain. She finally understood what had actually happened.